G'day, my name's Ian Campbell from Palliative Care Australia. Welcome to Thursdays at 3, our new video and podcast series featuring conversations with people living and working at the end of life. Today we meet a registered nurse who's worked in palliative care in the Illawarra region of New South Wales for over 30 years. You don't look that old, Sally.
I think I'm as old as Palliative Care Australia, actually.
Yes, you are.
Or I've been in Palliative Care Australia. I mean, I've been in palliative care for as long as Palliative Care Australia has existed. So
you're dead right. Yeah. Let me talk a bit more about you. For the last 10 years, Sally has worked exclusively in aged care as a palliative care clinical nurse consultant and is currently a nurse educator with a local aged care service. Hello, Sally Fredericks.
Hello, Ian. Thank you for having me.
Really great for you to share some time with us today and squeezing us in around your granddaughter's nap time as well.
Yes.
So we'll be very quiet not to disturb your little granddaughter.
Thank you.
Sally, keen to take you back to your days at university, going through the nursing degree at the University of Wollongong. You're a keen, energetic, enthusiastic nurse. The age of 22, you're out in the big wide world and you're in a palliative care setting. What was it that drove you towards palliative care as sort of your nursing specialty on the back of your uni experience?
I guess, well, firstly, I was in Lismore for uni, just to say.
Other end of New South Wales.
Hello, Southern Cross. And I guess I could be romantic and say I've always drawn to palliative care. It was always for me, but it really wasn't like that. I just wanted to be on the South Coast. I was about to be married and I needed to be employed down here. And reflecting back, it was the perfect work for me. It was the perfect work for me. It found me. But at the time, it was just I needed to be employed and I needed somewhere to work and earn money and build on my nursing experience. But I was very blessed to get a job at Bulli Specialist Palliative Care Unit. I think it was only 5 years open at that stage. And I think I even had to Google what palliative care was because I didn't really know the job that I was applying for. I had some vague understanding, but I didn't really know. So I had a very sharp learning curve in that first 12 months. But like I said, the universe knew more than I did, and it was exactly the right space for me.
What made you stick with it? 30 years later, here you are still working palliative care. What made you stick with it?
Well, I'm a person that needs time and I need job satisfaction and I need a kindness in my work and empathy is a part of who I am, and the philosophy of palliative care just sat so neatly for me. I guess I didn't enjoy the adrenaline of a lot of the fast-paced areas of nursing, but it's not to say, I was laughing with colleagues yesterday. I said I'm a bit like a duck. I can be moving very smoothly on the top of the water, but paddling like mad underneath, because there's often times when you really have to respond in a very considered but timely way for someone deteriorating very quickly or something. But I guess for me it was just a great space. And sort of 8 or 10 years after I had been working in pal care, my beautiful mum was diagnosed with motor neurone disease. So I actually stepped away for a few years because I couldn't work in that space and look after mum. That was just too hard.
Yeah.
So I had some time away and I actually went into dialysis, which in itself is a similar space. So, but I was always drawn back to pal care. And then I stopped for a little while with children and, here I am again with pal care, but now in an aged care sort of setting, so specialist palliative care in aged care.
Tell me, applying for that first job at Bulli Hospital in the palliative care ward there, you mentioned that you almost had to Google what palliative care was.
Yeah.
People will be surprised to know that the palliative care isn't necessarily a core ingredient or a strong theme that runs through the nursing degree or doctor training. It's not necessarily something that people graduate with an in-depth knowledge of or skills in.
Yeah, and there's an irony for me in that because everybody dies. So, and most people will die with a chronic complex, slow deteriorating illness, not necessarily a sudden illness, and palliative care or a palliative approach will have some aspect to that dying process. And for me, compassionate dying is essential to nursing and to medicine. And I think that I don't feel that there's enough focus in our nurse training and our medical training in palliative care, and and even in the specialist spaces, the oncology model sits neatly with palliative care, but that's the greatest number of deaths is cardiology, cardiac failure, heart failure, dementia. It's still, I think, one of the challenges, and I was thinking about it last night knowing we were going to talk today, and I think one of the challenges is that the trajectory of oncology death is that people move along quite well and then they suddenly die. So there's a predictability. Whereas in dementia and the chronic complex illnesses like heart failure or renal failure, there's these, flattenings, and you don't know which moment is the moment of death. So you don't know at which point the referral is appropriate. And that's why, for me, the referral should come much sooner, because it's not about the terminal phase. Palliative care, the terminal phase is actually, it might sound silly, but it's not. The terminal phase is actually, from a clinical perspective, often the easiest bit, because you've got them in a comfortable, settled, they've often got medication to manage agitation. And so that last couple of days of nursing, obviously for families, is horrendously heartbreaking, but although not always horrendously heartbreaking, it can just be, the next step. But
yes,
the last few days is often not as hard as the weeks and months before that, when there's restlessness, there's agitation, there's falls, there's infection, there's, all the things that come with end-stage organ failure or end-stage dementia.
How do you go about, I guess, teaching the art of palliative care? As part of your career, you've lectured students at the University of Wollongong and tried to increase their understanding of palliative care.
Yeah.
Explain the art of palliative care to us.
That's a really tricky one, because it is a philosophical, intuitive kind of skill that comes with time. And I guess being able to observe skilled clinicians in palliative care it's an osmosis. There's an ability to watch and learn, and that's the space that I got. That's the blessing that I got when I first started as a palliative young nurse in a palliative care unit. I had amazing mentors supporting me to make hard decisions or to guide hard things for families and for loved ones. So that's the thing that I want to offer when I go to work every day. I don't want to be the decision maker. I want to offer that willingness to be a mentor, allow staff to be vulnerable, say, I don't actually know, what do you see, Sally? Let's talk about this together. Because I work with amazing people, like aged care. It actually makes me feel emotional to think about the people that I work with every day, because they're such a resilient, amazing group of people, because that's not what the media captures. And the everyday in aged care is really challenging, but incredibly honourable. And I work with that group of people.
Yeah,
that's how lucky I am. I get to do that. So I actually don't deal a lot with the residents, but I support the people who support the residents. And I think more than anything, there's this core group I've probably worked in 10 aged care facilities in the Illawarra over the last 10 or 12 years. And in every aged care facility, there's this core group of goodness that exists. And even when we're getting it wrong, and it's a human industry. It's a human industry. We can't get it right every time. Even when we're getting it wrong, we're trying so bloody hard to get it right, and we're trying to learn, and we're reflecting, and what could we have done better? But one of the struggles is I always, I'd go home from a day at work and I would say to my hubby, I walked in and it was almost like, thank God you're here. You know that show that was on?
Yes, yeah.
Thank God you're here. And it's just that reassurance that they want, that someone with the knowledge and skills and 30 years of experience can help guide them and mentor them and reassure them and communicate with families around what they're seeing. Yes, you are seeing someone who's deteriorating. Yes, we now need to, steer this ship towards compassionate dying and away from hospital transfers and, and unfortunately, it's often a new grad RN that has to make those really hard decisions. Like there's, they've been to specialists who haven't been able to have that conversation. And then we have deterioration and it's left to novices in aged care to have to do really hard things. And, they are trying their best every day.
Sally, at the risk of making us both emotional and weepy again, I'm keen
Sorry,
to
my chin was rattling. I was trying.
No, not at all. Not at all. You're in safe company. I think that the need to embed palliative care more in aged care is accepted. There were 12 recommendations from the Aged Care Royal Commission that flagged the need for palliative care and aged care to sit together and to be more intermeshed. And indeed, it's one of the key points that PCA is always banging on about. The aged care sector needs better training, better support when it comes to palliative care. Mm-hmm. What have been the roadblocks, do you think, to making palliative care a more embedded practice within aged care?
I think one of the really tricky bits is resource. The specialist palliative care service, I think, struggles to, I think the specialist palliative care service struggles to have the resource available to support the aged care sector the way it needs to be supported. Mm-hmm. And I think that the generalist system doesn't understand that palliative care isn't just about terminal care or oncology. Mm-hmm. So the referrals, there's two factors, I guess, from my experience. The referrals that come early to the specialist service are often have to be tucked away because the person isn't actually in the actively dying phase. So, and again, that's not a criticism of any system, but just an acknowledgement that, so when a referral comes for, say, a person who's got end-stage Parkinson's, who's struggling with falls and nighttime agitation and restlessness, the struggle is that does that belong to geriatrics or does that belong to neurology, or is that actually about palliative care and the palliative?
Right. Yep.
And that's just an example. And so what might happen is that, the neurologist might say, no, they're not appropriate for palliative care yet because they're not actively dying. And I'm like, well, that's not what palliative care is. It's not just about actively dying. And so the referral isn't made. So then the system loses confidence in the fact that, well, maybe palliative care is just about the terminal phase, and unless it's oncology. And so you just in this of
keep going around and around.
Yeah, quandary. Whereas, if you said to someone who's got stage 4 cancer, let's make a palliative care referral, they'd absolutely do that because the oncology model sits so neatly and everybody understands it as the next stage of terminal diagnosis with cancer is a palliative referral. So I think there's just a trick for, just there's a building of knowledge around that, what is a palliative illness, and not just saying it, but actually understanding it.
And the power of the early referral and the better understanding of the power that palliative care can have much earlier in someone's diagnosis, that it isn't just about that phase of active dying.
Yeah, and it's not just an early referral. It's also talking, say, to my staff, when they say, Mary's had another infection. This is the third infection in 3 months, and she's had 2 falls. I say, when you talk to the family, make sure you're talking to them about the fact that this is a reflection of deterioration, so that the families understand that these aren't just isolated events. This is a reflection of a changing person, so that when that next stage and that next stage and that next stage comes, the families are building understanding back here rather than, being surprised at the end going, but they were so well. And you're like, well, actually, no, they've had recurrent infections, multiple falls, significant weight loss, all the things that reflect deterioration. And, it just helps build understanding, I think, for the family and for the loved one to,
You mentioned the families there, and I wonder if there's an opportunity right up front when a loved one goes into a residential aged care facility for the family to accept the fact that this is perhaps a palliative phase of their loved one's life, that they're going into aged care and having a better acceptance of what that means, and perhaps engaging palliative care much early.
Yeah, and I think too, because the misunderstanding is palliative care is about dying, people think that if you're going into aged care and we say it's part of a palliative, we manage from a palliative approach, they think that Mary's not dying. And it's like, no, that's actually not what we're saying. So we need to build knowledge around the fact that palliative care is actually about quality of life and happiness and choosing, the direction you want in your healthcare and dignity of risk, so that you can, still get out and about and do things, but it's not about hospitals and treatments and, it's just compassionate dying rather than, I'm not sure how I'm not sure of the words, but I know what I'm thinking.
Let's focus on the joy of your work a little bit more, Sally, and that quality of life that you talk about. Can you share some of the experiences you've had when you've been able to deliver a quality of life to someone, and the little things that you or your team have been able to do to deliver quality of life? What are some of the experiences you've had?
Well, it's interesting. Like I was thinking last night, because often, particularly, there's people that come into aged care that come from the school of hard knocks. They've lived a difficult life. They've lived a really difficult life. They come into a hospital and they've been told that they've got 3 months to live. They're disheveled. They're unkept. It's just been really, They come to an aged care facility and they live 5 years. There's no medical change. All that has happened is that they are they belong. They've actually got a group.
Yeah.
They belong. There's this kindness that is around them. There's cheek and humor and wit and let's talk footy and I'm picturing the older men that have come in, and they've got 3 meals. They've got 3 meals a day that they haven't had for 10 years. It's just such a lovely thing to see that sense of, and that to me is the epitome of the palliative approach. They didn't die in the first 3 months. It wasn't ever about that, but it was always about belonging, compassion and kindness. And, people say, how is that person still with us? And we're like, they're here. They're still with us because they came here.
Yep.
Because, you've cared for them and you've given them something they've probably not ever had in their whole life. A community and a sense and a belonging and kindness and meals. That's what aged care is to me. That's what aged care is to me. And you might also have someone that comes in who's been in the hospital system, who's exhausted. Hospitals are exhausted. They're working so hard every day. And, if you can get an elderly, frail person into out of a hospital and into an aged care setting and give them 3 lovely last months, because it's just change. It just changes. It's not about blood pressures and temperatures and, CAT scans and things. It's about compassionate dying. And so that's the sort of things that we see that to me is the perfect example of what palliative care is. And none of that is the last days of someone's life. Yeah.
How has your work and the experiences you've had influenced your life outside of work? What has death taught you about living?
Oh, Ian, you're funny. I think that my beautiful children always laugh at me because they will say, "Mum, can we please have a day where we don't talk about dying?" And I'm like, maybe not. And it's not a morbid conversation, although my beautiful son-in-law often has existential crises as he leaves our house because I've talked about funeral plans or what song I want at my funeral, or so how I want my advanced care plan to look. And he's like, "Why are we talking about that?" I'm like, "I'm sorry, it's the industry." But I think it makes you focus on what's important. It probably makes you, my husband will tease me and say that, he doesn't come home with a headache because any headache he's got is nothing compared to the person that I've had to deal with at work. Yeah. You're nodding. You're the son of a nurse. You're the
Yes.
son of a nurse. Who are you?
Yes, I am. Yep, they're everywhere in my life. Yeah.
So that's probably not exclusive to palliative care, but we've always got one better story. If you want to tell us how sick you feel, we've always got one better story to tell you.
Yes.
So, whoops. But yeah, it just influences your whole life. It influences. It's core to me. It's part of my philosophy of living and life is who I am as a palliative care nurse.
And look, putting you back on the ward for a moment, what value have you seen in that early planning when families do it? How does that help the care you and your team provides? If somebody does have an advanced care plan, if a family has had those conversations, how does it help you do what you need to do?
Amazing. It's unbelievably different. And it's important that the plan is realistic to the goals, to the condition. We're sometimes challenged when people say, "I want everything," and they're very advanced in their illness. And we have to, navigate that challenging conversation and say, "Yeah, everything, but there's a limit to this because, you wouldn't survive a cardiac arrest. You wouldn't." So there's sometimes tricky challenges around that. But for people that are clear in saying, "I want to be comfortable. I don't want to go to hospital anymore. I'm happy to have antibiotics at the facility, but if they don't work, I accept that, I just want to be kept comfortable and I want my family around." As change occurs, and it's not if change occurs, it's as change occurs. And even using the right words can make such a difference. So even being able to say to a family, when your mum starts to deteriorate, rather than if your mum starts to deteriorate, because your mum will deteriorate. She's frail, she's elderly. So as your mum starts to change, we will be able to negotiate with the doctors and they'll come and review, and we'll be able to get medication so that if she can't take tablets anymore, we can have injections available to make sure she's comfortable, and that will avoid us having to transfer her to hospital. There's such a peace and ease in that for everybody, for the nursing staff caring for the person, for the doctor to have clear understanding of the family's understanding, and for the families and the loved ones.
And hearing you talk, does it allow the family to be the son, to be the daughter, to be the husband, to be the mother, and focus on the person and not worry about being the carer, perhaps, or having to make those big decisions? They can enjoy the moment, enjoy the time.
Yeah, I think when the crisis comes, you don't want to have to, and even the word decision sometimes throws me, because there comes a point when there is no more decisions. It's just being guided by the condition. The person's condition is so advanced now that we just need, we've reached the peak of treatment. There's no more treatment that is going to change the circumstance. So it's reassuring them that what's happening next is about deterioration, and these discussions have taken place. months ago, and we're just being guided by what your mum wanted or what you knew that your mum or dad wanted. So it takes away, there's already crisis and emotion. It just takes away another layer of stress in all of that. It just allows families to be.
Sally, a final word before I let you get back to your sleeping granddaughter.
Yeah.
The aged care sector, aged care workers have been under such pressure for so many years now and been such a focus of bad news. How are they travelling? What can you share with us? What do you say to that?
I think that if I could pay them the Prime Minister's wage, I would, because they are exceptional people. They are exceptional people. They do amazing things every day, and they're exhausted. There's no question they're exhausted, but they're resilient. They're highly motivated. I think, as I said at the beginning, it's a human industry, and sometimes we don't get it right, but that's never the intention. And obviously, if we got it wrong and there was intent, then there's a process that we need to follow. But that's, my experience is that even when we get it wrong, we are trying so hard to get it right. And I'm just really proud to be a part of an industry like aged care. I'm exceptionally proud to be an aged care worker. I am happy every day to be at work and to be amongst good people.
So glad that you're a part of this community, Sally Fredericks. Thank you so much for sharing your work and wisdom with us today.
Thank you, Ian. It was lovely to chat with you.
Sally Fredericks, great to hear from her today. And whether you've tuned in via Spotify or YouTube or one of our socials, thank you so much for taking an interest and being part of the Thursdays at 3 conversation. You'll find more information, advice and support on the Palliative Care Australia website. See you next time.